There are people still alive today who remember silence. Not the silence of a dead phone battery or a dropped Wi-Fi connection. The original silence. The silence that preceded the permanent noise. The silence of a morning before the world had yet delivered its first demand for your attention. The silence of a mind that was not yet being competed for by 17 simultaneous systems of extraordinary sophistication, each of which had been specifically engineered through the analysis of billions of behavioral data points to ensure that the silence did not last. These people are old now. Many of them are very old, and they are leaving. Not dramatically, not all at once. In the quiet, continuous, entirely ordinary way that generations always leave, one person at a time, in hospitals and in bedrooms, and in the ordinary places where the ordinary endings of ordinary human lives occur. But what is leaving with them is not ordinary. What is leaving with them is something that no archive can preserve, no documentary can capture, no digital record can store in the form that makes it genuinely available to the people who will need it most. What is leaving with them is the living memory of a world that operated according to fundamentally different principles than the world that is replacing it. The direct, first-person, embodied, felt knowledge of what human life actually was like before the Great Transformation, before the screen became the primary surface through which reality was encountered, before the algorithm became the primary mechanism through which information, attention, desire, and connection were organized and delivered, before the smartphone colonized the pocket and the bedroom and the dinner table and the moment before sleep and the moment of waking, before the architecture of daily human attention was systematically redesigned by systems whose primary objective was not human flourishing but human engagement. Yuval Noah Harari has observed with the particular combination of historical depth and philosophical seriousness that distinguishes his thinking from almost everything else being said about the present moment, that this departure is not simply the ordinary sadness of generational loss. It is something more specific and more structurally significant than the ordinary sadness. It is the closing of the last window through which a living comparison between two fundamentally different modes of human existence remains available, not as an intellectual reconstruction, not as a historical description, as the testimony of a human being who was there, who lived on both sides of the boundary, who can speak from the inside of genuine personal experience rather than from the outside of scholarly research, to what actually changed and what was actually lost and what was actually gained and what the numbers and the studies and the archives and the oral history projects cannot fully capture, because what they cannot capture is the texture, the felt quality, the specific character of what it was like to be a human consciousness inhabiting a world that the transformation has now made permanently inaccessible to anyone born after the crossing. To understand why this matters requires understanding something about the specific character of what this generation carries, that nothing else carries and nothing else can carry. They carry the baseline, the original calibration, the direct, unmediated, personally experienced reference point for what human consciousness felt like, what human attention felt like, what human community felt like, what human work and love and grief and boredom and celebration and the ordinary, unremarkable texture of an ordinary, unremarkable day felt like, when these things were organized along the lines that millions of years of evolutionary development had established as the deep structure of human experience, rather than along the lines that the last 30 years of technological transformation have been substituting for that deep structure. This baseline is not sentimentality. It is not nostalgia for a simpler time, though it contains elements that are easy to misread as either of those things. It is something more precisely and more consequentially useful than either. It is the specific form of knowledge that can only be generated by direct comparison, by having actually inhabited both sides of a transformation large enough to constitute a genuine before and after in the character of human experience, by being the person who can say, from the authority of their own felt life rather than from the authority of any scholarly position, here is what the before was actually like, not as reconstruction but as memory, And here is where the after differs from it in ways that the people who have only known the after cannot perceive because they have nothing to compare the after to. For most of human history, the pace of change was slow enough that this kind of living comparison between fundamentally different modes of human existence was not necessary because fundamentally different modes of human existence did not arise within the span of a single human life. A person born in England in 1750 and a person born in England in 1800 inhabited, in their most fundamental experiential dimensions, recognizably similar worlds. The surface features differed. The specific political arrangements, the specific economic conditions, the specific cultural fashions of the moment differed, but the deep structure of the experience of being a conscious human being moving through a day, the quality of attention, the character of social life, the texture of work and community, and the relationship to time and to silence and to the rhythms of the natural world remained sufficiently similar across the span of those 50 years that the older generation's experience required no special preservation. It would be recognizable to the younger generation without effort. This continuity has now been broken, not in a minor way, not in the way of incremental change that, when examined across the span of a few decades, reveals a gradient of modest development rather than a genuine transformation. In the way of a boundary, a crossing. A point at which the before and the after became genuinely, qualitatively, irreversibly different in dimensions that go to the deepest levels of what the experience of being a conscious human being moving through a day actually consists of. Consider the most basic dimension: attention. For the entirety of human history until approximately 30 years ago, the default state of the human mind, in the ordinary moments of ordinary daily life, was some approximation of genuine presence to whatever was actually occurring, not perfect presence, not the idealized presence of the contemplative tradition, but the ordinary, unremarkable presence of a consciousness that was not being simultaneously competed for by 17 algorithmically optimized systems of attention capture, that was not carrying in its pocket a device designed by some of the most sophisticated engineers in human history specifically to ensure that the consciousness could not remain present to whatever was actually occurring for longer than a few minutes without being redirected toward the device and the endless stream of more stimulating content that the device was prepared to deliver. The generation that is ending grew up with ordinary presence as the default, not as an achievement, not as the result of deliberate practice or the application of specific techniques developed to counteract the specific forces that the contemporary environment brings to bear against the maintenance of presence. As the unremarkable background condition of a mind that had not yet been subjected to the specific training and distraction that the contemporary environment provides continuously and comprehensively to every mind that inhabits it. When the people of this generation describe sitting in a waiting room with nothing to do, they are not describing an experience of boredom in the contemporary sense of the word. They are describing something that contemporary people who have not experienced the absence of the device in their pocket cannot quite reconstruct from imagination. A state of undemanded consciousness. A mind left alone with itself, not as a deliberate practice of meditation or contemplation, but simply as the ordinary condition of a human being in a moment of genuine downtime, with no available source of external stimulation and therefore with the full, unhurried availability of its own processing to whatever thoughts and observations and internal developments the undemanded state produced. Thoughts that connected things, memories that surfaced without being sought. The specific quality of creative and reflective movement that the undemanded mind undertakes when it is genuinely left to its own devices, rather than immediately occupied by the devices it is carrying. This state is not simply pleasant. It was, for most of human history, the primary source of the specific cognitive activities that most distinguish the human mind from the minds of other species. Integration, synthesis. The long, slow, non-linear connection of seemingly unrelated experiences and ideas that constitutes genuine insight. The processing of difficult emotions through the gentle pressure of undemanded attention that allows them to transform and settle in ways that the continuous provision of distraction from them consistently prevents. The development of the genuinely individual perspective that is the product of a mind that has spent sufficient time alone with its own actual encounter with reality to have arrived at something that is genuinely its own, rather than primarily the product of the continuous stream of other people's perspectives that the contemporary information environment provides as a substitute for genuine individual thinking. The generation that is ending carries in their bodies the knowledge of this state as a default. They did not pursue it. They did not protect it. They did not recognize it as valuable in the specific way that the person who has lost something recognizes its value in the losing. It was simply there, simply the ordinary condition of a mind in the ordinary moments of an ordinary life. And when they describe it to people who have never experienced it as a default, they are describing something that, however clearly they describe it, cannot be fully transmitted through description. Because the thing that is being described is not an idea, it is an experience, a felt quality, the specific texture of a consciousness in a condition that the contemporary environment has made sufficiently rare that most people who have grown up within the contemporary environment have not experienced it as a default and cannot fully reconstruct it from imagination. The second dimension in which the living memory of this generation is irreplaceable is the dimension of community. The specific quality of the dense, geographically rooted, face-to-face, long-term community that was, for most of human history and for most of this generation's lived experience, the primary social reality of human life. The community in which the people who constituted your social world were people you had known across sufficient time and through sufficient genuine shared experience that the knowledge was three-dimensional. Not the flat, curated, self-presented knowledge of a social media profile. The rounded, contradictory, fully humanizing knowledge of someone you had seen in their good moments and their bad moments, their competent moments and their struggling moments, their generous moments and their small moments. Someone whose history you knew not because you had read their timeline, but because you had been present in the ordinary, unremarkable way of shared daily life for significant portions of it. Harari's evolutionary framework illuminates why this specific quality of community matters in ways that go beyond the ordinary preference for warmth and connection. Human beings evolved in communities of approximately 150 people, in which every member was personally known to every other member through exactly this kind of three-dimensional, temporally accumulated, physically co-present knowledge, in which the primary social facts of one's existence, who one was trusted by and who trusted one, what one's standing was in the community's eyes, what one owed to whom and what was owed to one, were all constituted through direct, ongoing, unmediated relationship in a shared physical reality, in which the social anxiety that the evolutionary architecture installed as the primary motivational mechanism for social compliance was calibrated for exactly this scale of social world and for exactly this quality of social relationship. The generation that is ending knew this social world in the form it took in the 20th century, not the ancestral form exactly, but close enough in its essential dimensions, its scale, its density of genuine mutual knowledge, its rootedness in shared physical space and shared physical experience, that the social architecture the evolutionary process had built was reasonably well suited to the demands the social world was actually making. The anxiety about social standing was anxiety about standing within a group whose members you genuinely knew and who genuinely knew you, which made the anxiety an approximately accurate signal about something that mattered in terms that the ancestral calibration was designed to track. The belonging was belonging within a community whose other members were actually present to you and you to them, which made the belonging a genuine social fact rather than a number of followers or connections that the digital metrics display as a substitute for the genuine article. What they knew in this way cannot be fully conveyed to people who have grown up in a world where the primary social reality has been progressively relocated to digital environments that provide social connection at radically different scales, densities, and qualities than the social world that the evolutionary architecture was calibrated for. The person who has grown up in the contemporary social environment can be told about the difference, can be provided with rich and accurate and thoughtful descriptions of what dense, geographically rooted, long-term, face-to-face community felt like from the inside of genuine participation in it. But they cannot know it in the only way that genuinely knowing it provides the specific benefit that Harari is pointing toward. The way of direct, first-person, embodied experience across sufficient time to have fully inhabited the quality that is being described. The third dimension in which the living memory of this generation matters in ways that go beyond what any archive can preserve is the dimension of what Harari sometimes calls the existential basics. The relationships with work, with mortality, with the rhythms of the natural world, with the cycles of effort and rest, with the specific quality of the connection between one's own labor and the visible outcomes of that labor, that constituted the experiential infrastructure of human life for the entirety of human history before the current transformation began to redesign that infrastructure at every level simultaneously. The relationship with work is perhaps the most consequential of these. For most of human history, most people's work involved a direct, physical, sensory engagement with material reality, with things that existed independently of any screen, that had their own properties and their own resistance to manipulation, that pushed back against effort in the specific way that physical reality pushes back, and that provided, through the accumulated experience of that pushing back and the development of the skill that the pushing back developed, the specific quality of felt competence that constitutes what it means to genuinely know how to do something difficult. To have developed, through the long accumulation of practice and failure and improvement and eventual mastery, a capability that is genuinely yours, that lives in your hands and your body and the specific neural circuits that years of engagement with specific material challenges have developed. That cannot be lost to a software update or made obsolete by a change in the platform's algorithm. The person who made things with their hands, who grew food or built structures or repaired engines or made garments or baked bread or performed any of the thousands of specific manual and craft activities that constituted most of the work of most of the human beings who have ever lived, had a relationship with their own competence that was grounded in a way that most contemporary forms of work are not. Grounded in the specific, visible, tangible evidence of what they had produced. In the bread that had actually been baked and that would actually be eaten. In the wall that had actually been built and that would actually stand. In the garment that had actually been made and that would actually be worn. The connection between the effort and the outcome was direct, legible, undeniable. The work produced something real in the most literal sense of real, and the person who had produced it knew that they had produced it in a way that required no external validation, no engagement metric, no confirmation from any algorithm or any audience. This quality of grounded competence, of genuine skill developed through genuine engagement with genuine material resistance, is not simply a pleasant feeling.